Thank you, everybody, so far who has joined us. I'm Suzanne Boyd, and I'm here with my co-presenter.
I'm Jessica Gartner. Hello, everyone.
We're both from the math departments, mathematical sciences, and we're going to be talking about scaffolding for student success on like large projects in STEM classes for us, sort of math in particular. Um, okay, so yeah, and I was. Well, okay. I'm going to stick to my slide. Ashley's talk was so interesting, but I'm going to try not to go off on tangents yet. We have time for discussion later, so we can do it later. Okay, Jessica, you want to get us through the first section here?
Yeah, so like Suzanne says, we're going to go over some scaffolded projects, and we're hoping today to really get our point across by giving you a quick introduction on the projects, but then we'll each give an example of a significant project in one of our math courses, and then we'll turn it over to a discussion with the group specifically on how you could create large projects or maybe how you could build in check-in points to a larger project that is already in one of your courses. And so we have a couple goals for our session. We're really hoping that by the end of this, you'll be able to understand some examples that we give you of some scaffolded projects, specifically in the technical space, and then how a lot of the high impact practices, key elements can be incorporated into those scaffolded projects. And then really start thinking about maybe creating a large project for one of your own courses, or maybe thinking of something that you already have in one of your courses, how you could make it a bit more scaffolded or sort of add check-in points for student success. All right, so just a quick intro to some scaffolded projects. Um, I think a lot of people might have at least a scaffolded project in your course, but you may not have thought of it being a scaffolded project officially before. But what's cool about these projects is that they really engage a lot of HIP's key elements. So we have 5 here. I think Suzanne just exactly copied these from the HIP list. So we have 5 here, which is most of them. I won't just read them, but a lot of it is really allowing students to have and meet higher expectations, allowing more frequent timely feedback. There's a lot of pros by introducing these into your courses. And then another thing here, the last bullet, is just connecting all of your course ideas from your syllabus or just your overall learning objectives into a scaffolded project and then sort of reveal this hidden curriculum or these things that aren't necessarily listed in your syllabus or aren't necessarily listed in your learning objectives, but are things that students need to be able to do to be successful in your class. So that's really cool about scaffolded projects as well.
All
All
right,
right,
so I'm
turn it
gonna,
over to Dan.
yeah, I guess I'll just mention that I keep wanting to talk about Ashley's talk, but that this is sort of this cut and paste that Jessica was saying from the HIPS key elements. That's from like the 2013 original version. So now that it's been recently shortened to 6, the title page about this has the sort of original version, but you can, anyway, it's all the same kind of idea. It's just slightly different catchphrases. All right, so I'm going to talk about, there's a mathematics from a historical perspective class that I teach. I teach a couple different versions of that. I'm going to be teaching a version for the Honors College in the spring, actually. But the details for my presentation today are going to be from the Math 345 course that I developed. It's actually an OWCB course. And so I tell students to think of it as both a math course and a history course, sort of. But from the perspective of a mathematician. So they have to do weekly math problems in context, like, we introduce like, here's, the Babylonian number system, and here's some problems they could solve problems like that. So there is plenty of math in it. But then they also have reading and discussion posts. And then partly because it's OWCB and because part of the goal, as I understand of OWCB, is to do writing in the discipline, I wanted to do a couple of big papers writing about sort of math in sort of a historical context. But what I do is, so each of those term papers 15% of the grade, but another 15% is I give them short writing assignments every week to help them build up to be able to turn in this term paper. And so there's a short writing assignments that those scaffold directly into papers 1 and 2. And then also they have to pick, um, well, it's in 345 in the history class is paper 1, in the honors class is either one, right? So they have to give a presentation in class, a significant presentation, like 20 minutes and with slides, the, on the topic of one of their papers. So they have to both do, this doesn't require for OWCB, but for me, they have to do both oral and written demonstration, of competence, right, regarded to this one of these larger projects. So that's just a quick overview. Um, and then I want to mention that, so I'll give you a little bit more details here. So one thing there, again, the whole theme here is how important it is to give them explicit instructions and expectations, right? That's sort of hidden curriculum. So for the first paper, the instructions I give them include a list of topic choices and then sort of a 2-page guide on, like, what do I mean by writing a paper that sort of has some math and some exposition? Like, how do you do that, right? What am I looking for? So this whole thing of expectations. And then the short writing assignments, I have them do, so for term paper 1, they have to write a page with different ideas for the paper, and then I choose one, and then they have to do sort of a brief overview, and then they have to, because they have to write about math, and this is something new for them. Like, they either do, like, write math problems with maybe showing some work, or type sentences for an English class, but they have to kind of put those two things together. And even though they've looked at textbooks, they've never done that themselves. So I have them write up a textbook style solution of a math problem from our homework. So they not just, so they have to write all the connecting words and type it all up. And then they turn in an outline of paper 1 and then a first draft. And then after feedback, they submit a revised draft. So those are the steps that I have scaffolded to paper 1, and the, um, that's the outline of what I give them. For paper 2, then, now that they've been through it once, I just get them some guidelines on the topic choice. And then the short writing assignments are kind of similar, but I mix it up just a little bit. So they have to describe their paper ideas, and then I choose one of them. And all of these things, like, it's not just like bullets, it's an essay. So they have to go full sentences, introduction, conclusion, blah, 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 right? I give them, a complete description of what I'm expecting from them in each of these short writing assignments too. And then 2.5 pages from the middle of their paper. So, like, a subtopic, I'll tell them, like, what got you hooked on this idea? Like, what were you thinking of? Like, maybe write kind of like a mini paper, right, with your references. And then I have them do, instead of doing a math problem, focus on the mathier part of this paper and then write up some of that, right, the next week, and then an outline, the first draft, and then the revision. So those are the ways that I've broken down the paper for them. And of course, I should mention, of course, that, Jessica and I are easy to find, right? I obviously have each one of these little bullet points is like a whole page or something, or two, right? A PDF or on Canvas or something. So if anybody wants to see more details on how we did this, of course, reach out to us. We just didn't want to be showing you, walls of text in this presentation. So this is this one very specific example, and I know that my example is kind of weird because it's like math history. It's really unusual, right? So I wanted to also give you a few other ideas on, um, how I've done projects in other classes that weren't this very specific OWCB where there's a lot of writing required, right? So this is a bit longer list, but um, again, I'll just sort of skim through it, and then we can talk about anything you want to talk about in more detail, separately. So there's a couple things that I like about doing big projects in math classes. So one of them is, in some math classes, like the examples I have here are trigonometry and multivariate calculus, but in a lot of math classes and other STEM classes, I think, there's just like different assignments every week and they're never connected, right? So how do you go about doing that um, without somehow taking away from the time spent, learning all those topics you're trying to fit in there, right? And doing the practice that needs to be done to do that. So one thing you can do that's really simple would be connect the assignments loosely via a theme or application area. And, um, if your class is already applied, maybe you can, find an even, narrower focus, right? Um, so in trigonometry, for example, there's there's always a lot of application problems, but instead what I did one semester was just like every week I had them do a problem that was astronomy, do an astronomy application, so that they sort of, at the end had this sort of story to tell about um, putting all these things together in that under that heading. They had a sort of richer understanding of mathematical applications, mathematical uses in astronomy. Um, Multivariate calculus, if you guys, I see some of you on the call will know this, but there's a lot of physics applications, and there's a lot of good physics applications. But when I taught this class once, I just decided I kind of designed this project about monster trucks. And so like every section we did, I thought of another way to apply what we're doing to monster trucks. And so that was fun. They even had like the students even brought, that was actually, well, the students even brought in like, some of them brought in cakes at the end of the semester to the final exam with like monster truck decorations and stuff. Like they had a lot of fun with it. Um, and then, so then, or if that doesn't make sense, a different kind of approach would be to just one group project. So maybe if you usually teach a class that has modules every month or 2 or 3 modules, maybe one of them, the assessment, could be a project instead of an exam. So for example, when I taught in it, when we, well, in our intro quantitative reasoning course, there's a modeling unit, and it kind of varies by semester, but that assessment can be a project, both write-up and presentation. It's on linear and exponential models related to coffee consumption. And I actually I taught intro quantitative reasoning fall 2020 online, synchronous. Um, and the students did their projects even like in this online class. And they did presentations for the other students, even online on their projects. So that was actually a lot of fun. Um, there's lots of calculus projects and other projects for out there, and so maybe there are books written on this. So maybe in your field there are already materials out there of other people that have done projects that you could look for. And then the last kind of category is you can always give people extra credit opportunities. So a lot of students may not take you up on it, but some really might. And so even if you really can't figure out how to fit a project into the required portion of your class, there are those students who want to go above and beyond. So for example, in college algebra, once I assigned a project on the book Flatland. So for science geeks, if you guys haven't read this, then I encourage you to do so. Just like a smiling, right? Because it's just about like we live in a three-dimensional world. So it's about what would it be like to, for if you were being in a two-dimensional world or, one-dimensional, haha, or more, whatever. Anyway, it's about dimensions. That has very little to do with college algebra, but it was a lot of fun for the students that actually did it. So, okay, so that's my sort of really quick overview. I'm going to turn it over now to Jessica to talk about a different kind of project for her actuarial science classes.
Yeah, so I'm still in the math department, but within the math department, we have an actual science program or major. And so this particular example is for Actual Science 599, which is our capstone course. Students, in order to be in this class, have to be senior standing, and it's only 1 credit. So we have to keep that in mind. I can't assign, loads and loads of work for this particular class just because of how many hours per week we meet and how much we would expect students to do outside of class. But with that said, we really want to push our students to be prepared for the workforce after leaving our program. And so we wanted to use this course to assign a real world project. And this real world project is really something that most entry level actuaries would see shortly after graduating at some point in their career, regardless of industry that they go into. This is something that they definitely will see. So this project that we wanted to assign, I mean, very simply, is just analyzing a really large data set. And this data set that we have is a 200,000 row-ish data set in Excel. And it's a real data set that I got from an insurance company. It's like blinded and there's not any real people's information in it or anything, but it is a real data set. And so ultimately, we want to give this to the students and tell them to analyze and explain the data set. which that's the most simple way to say what the goal is. But how do you analyze a 200,000 row data set? What does that mean? And how can you explain that big of a data set? What does that mean? Many of these students, yes, they may have seen other smaller data sets in some of their other classes. They've had a lot of math classes where they're, and a lot of statistics classes where they're doing hands-on examples every week, kind of like what Suzanne said. A lot of them are used to turning in assignments every single week and not necessarily connecting all of those assignments throughout the semester. So this is one step beyond that, where we want them to connect a huge project, thinking about everything they've learned throughout their career at UWM, and actually applying it in this data set. And so for us to do this, we assign sequential projects and they kind of build on each other. So I set up this sort of stepping these stairs here, this little pyramid. So we have our first goal, then our second goal, and then our third goal. So the first goal, that red box on the bottom, is really identify and explain the data set that I mentioned. And it's really the financial results and the financial changes in that data set. And that's really the foundation for this entire project. In order to be successful after or the rest of the semester, they have to be successful at this first goal. So we have to get them to that point. Then once they're at that point, they're able to identify everything that happened. They really understand what's happening in the data. Then they can actually recommend changes to the finances or changes to the pricing structure that's in that data set. And that's really what a successful actuary is going to do in their career. And that's really, if you think about it, what a lot of people need to do in their careers, not just actuaries. It's taking one step beyond the initial assignment and making recommendations or asking meaningful questions to your leaders to not just answer the question, but take it one step further. So they need to recommend changes to the pricing structure. That would be that second sort of box there, the second goal. And then the third goal is to share their results and their recommendations to their leader. I have leader in quotes, or boss. That would just be me. Sometimes I do get professional actuaries to come in. They can present their findings to them as well. Um, in the real world, as an actuary, you're not really giving presentations to a large audience. You're not really giving a traditional like stand in front of a big audience and explain your work. More realistically, you're going to be sitting in a small meeting room and sharing your work one on one, or maybe like you're sharing it with one or two other people. So they need to be able to do that using a PowerPoint. Um, Also, they need to be able to do that explained in an email. So a whole semester of work, lots and lots of work that they've done, they need to be able to succinctly put that in very few words. So this is the opposite of writing a really big project or a really big paper. They need to be able to explain everything in as little words as possible. So that's a big thing too. So this is kind of the setup for it. And in order to do that, so Suzanne had before all the things that she sort of distributed and the small check-in points for her project. I'm going to kind of do the same thing here. So for that first goal where they're just identifying and explaining financial results in the Excel file, in the past, if I just give the Excel file out, students immediately feel overwhelmed. I know that's the case. It's just a really big file. Many of them may not have ever even opened Excel before. We have a wide variety of student abilities in our classes. And so I need to be able to assign these smaller check-in points and additional materials that they need. So in addition to the Excel file, I pass out an article on how to conduct one of these particular studies. They're actually called experience studies. And again, this would be done in any type of actuarial industry. So this particular article that I found is something that I did not write. I think Suzanne mentioned, if you look in your particular field, you might have some example projects or example things out there. It's nice to use things that already exist. And also, I think it's nice for students to see instructions, not just from me, but from other people in the field or other resources. So they can see that, yes, it's not just Jessica saying that you need to do this. Other people do this. And so I like to find resources out there. So they get things from me, they get things maybe from like professional page. They get things from Twitter, all different types of areas out there. So I pass out this article. And then in addition to the Excel data set, I have to give a data dictionary or data definition. So all the data in there needs to be described to them. What is it? And then since I said this is a real product, it's a dental product. It's a dental insurance product. So I have the actual flyers and the pamphlets describing what the product provides. So again, it's just multiple different resources for them to get comfortable with what they're looking at. And then I also have to go through general insurance industry metrics. So yes, our students go through calculus and statistics, and they learn how to, do order of operations, integrals, all this stuff. But we do not teach them general insurance industry metrics. How are we measuring insurance companies' profitability? So I have to go through that with them. And then I do give them specific instructions on the end goal and what the output is. And I think if you don't do that, you're not going to get, every student will turn in different levels of what's turned in. Some won't turn any output in. So they need very specific instructions and rubrics on what it is that they are turning in. And then I also send out some tips on effective email communications. So usually I'll get students, if I don't pass that out, I'll get emails that are like 10 pages long. Email should be, very short. So that's really nice to give all these different things to them so they can check in on them. And I pass them out in sequence. If I pass all of this out at once, again, students generally feel very overwhelmed. So I try to get them comfortable with each thing before we move on to the next item. And to do that, I actually assign smaller assignments or projects that have smaller point values to them to make sure that they are following along with the class and everyone feels comfortable with what it is that they need to do next. So I give smaller point assignments to some basic Excel function practice. Again, some people may not have ever seen Excel before, so just learning basic functions in there, I give points for that. We have a step where everyone needs to scrub the data, clean the data, prep the data. That's a very important part of analyzing data sets. Then we calculate some summary data or some is like total values by year, measures of central tendency, that kind of stuff to make sure that they are getting the correct answers in total and everyone's on the same page before they can do some deeper level analysis. So I have all those points on the side there, just smaller assignments. I think that's a big part of the scaffolded projects if you can assign smaller point levels just to make sure that everyone's holding on and you can identify students that are falling a little bit behind so you can work with them one-on-one to get them up to speed. And then so that's really the main bulk project of the semester. These next two are a little bit faster. So once they do that big analysis project in Excel, they're going to take that same data set that they just worked with and recommend price adjustments. So I need to pass out what the current pricing details are and what our goal pricing details are. So what is a goal? Well, that would just be whatever the company or whatever your boss is saying you're what are you shooting for. This is where we want to be pricing wise. How can we get there? So for this, there is not one correct answer. I would expect every student to have a different answer. And that's true of the last slide too. Every student will have a different answer for this project and is very open-ended. And a lot of students have difficulty with that because usually all of the math courses that they've taken up until now, there is a right answer and you want to get to that right answer. And so there's a lot of work throughout the semester to get them comfortable with there not being one answer and that everyone's work is going to look a little bit different. So that's part of the smaller check-in points is just making sure that they understand that and how is it that they can get an answer to this question. And I have some smaller assignments leading up to this one as well. And then finally, they just share their results with me. Once they've done all this work, it's not hard for them to come up with content for a presentation. They have lots of it. What's difficult is sifting through that and picking the points that are most important. So this is a huge project again. And if you go to the next slide, Suzanne, I list out some successes I've had with this particular scaffolded project. So this is a new project that we've implemented in the capstone course a couple of semesters ago. And every single semester, I add more check-in points and add more like scaffolding pieces to the project based on how the last semester performed. And I can tell you every time I add more, I'm able to set higher expectations. I set higher goals for students to achieve. They achieve way more tasks and much faster. Realistically, if this wasn't scaffolded, I don't even think we'd get through that first red box. Like we would never be able to recommend changes because they wouldn't necessarily even be able to get to the first analysis part. And we're able to assign this really big multifaceted project. I think that's really meaningful too, because most of the time in the real world, even if you're not an actuary, you're working on things that aren't in just one application. You need to connect Excel, emails, presentations, working with like sales folks and sales materials. How does all of that connect into a big picture? So it's really nice to assign a project that has all these different components. And again, without the scaffolding, I see way more confusion. And really, the students have less confidence. Most of them will say immediately, I don't know how to do this. I don't think I can do this. I hear a lot of like low confidence from the students, but as we assign smaller pieces, you can see that it's all connecting for them. And a lot of them feel, I think, really proud of their work when they're done at the end of the semester. So that's my example.
Okay, so
Um,
thank you guys so much for listening to us for several minutes there with our examples. Hopefully that primed the pump. So we have 16 minutes left. So maybe instead of 10 and 10, we'll do 8 and 8. But we really want to now engage you guys. There's only 12 people in this meeting. So and please feel free to turn your camera on, and you can raise your hand and then, unmute your mic when you want to speak. But we really do want you to hopefully while we were talking, either that raised questions in your mind or you started thinking, or maybe even when you saw the description of the session, you started thinking about this, or maybe you've already done this in your class, but we want to sort of from two different perspectives. So we kind of want to spend a few minutes thinking about like, if you don't have a large project, how do you create one, right? And then the second preview, the last few minutes will be like, once you have a large project, how do you build in checkpoints, right? Maybe you do those things at the same time, but so how can you create a large project? So does anybody, want to be brave? Anybody have an idea of a class which doesn't have a large project, but you're kind of noodling on it, and we might be able to like push you over push you over the edge here, and get you to do something in your class. Um, Maybe think about, are there aspects of the class that would make it conducive to a large project? Like it's not one section of a multi-section course where everyone has to do the same thing. Are there challenges to doing that you want us to help you like sort of brainstorm how to address? Is there anything we can help you do to get some resources? So here's sort of some of my questions for discussion, but I'm really hoping I'm stalling now. I'm chatting, hoping that somebody is formulating a thought. So I'm going to stop and hope for a raised hand. Good. Carolyn Zebra, go ahead. Turn your camera on if you can, or if not, at least we just love to hear you from with your mic.
Okay. So yeah, Carolyn Zebert. I'm with the School of Nursing, and I currently teach a outcomes and quality management course. And one of the bigger projects they have to do is develop a quality improvement project proposal. And so I do kind of have some scaffolding pieces built into that. My question is, sometimes there's confusion as to the expectations. So do you feel like maybe just like a one pager explanation of what's needed for each piece of the scaffolding is good enough, or should we be developing rubrics for each of those steps so they know how points are assigned for each of those scaffolding pieces? I think that's where I'm getting hung up.
Yeah, it's funny because now I want to go to one of the last slides. So something that we aren't talking about, but that I would encourage you as a good resource is there's this transparency in teaching and learning tilt. And I think actually Cecil's Ben Gouch knows some things about this too. Maybe he's going to be doing some workshops, but there's actually tons of information on the Tilt website. So there's a link here, which I know you can't click on in a QR code. But they break things down into like for each assignment, think even like if it's like, I want you to do these 5 exercises from the textbook today. For every time you give them an assignment, think about the purpose. Why are you giving this assignment to them? Um, the task that they have to do and the evaluation criteria. So I would say yes, like anytime you develop a rubric to help you grade, provide that to the students so that they know how to put their assignment together. And so it depends on, the number of pages. I can't tell you like should it be 1 page, should it be 2 pages, but it's going to depend on, what your expectation is, right? Something more involved is going to require more explanation. Jessica, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll just add, and I think you said at the beginning, Suzanne, like you want to think about why it is you're assigning this and what the purpose of it is. So my smaller check-in points, my smaller scaffolded pieces are much smaller point values, but I explain to them, it kind of has at the top why we're doing this. So this is just a check-in point to make sure that you're able to get to the total number that I'm looking for. Okay, they know that that's okay. This is how I'm going to grade it. But then later on, when it's much bigger point values, and I tell them the purpose of this is to explain your entire project, and this is something that you're presenting to your boss, you want to think about is how would you want something to come across to your boss? Is it going to be a loose paper that's trash that you're going to write one sentence on, or is it going to be some nice presentation that is clean, is consistent, all that kind of stuff? So I think for your class, if you say this is the goal of the assignment that I'm doing, this is what I'm looking for, that goal and purpose really helps my students at least understand what type of work they have to do for that, in addition to the point outcomes.
Anybody else want to? I mean, the other thing that I think about this too is I like to um, abstract things. I'm a mathematician as much as possible, right? So like I feel like even like if I'm reviewing grant proposals, like we have a rubric for that, right? And the explanation of the rubric should be in the solicitation for the grant. I mean, that's sort of our homework, right? So like it's the same thing. Anybody else in the audience want to comment on this, or you have a different something different, or does Carolyn want to follow up? Thank you for sharing, Carolyn. Brian,
Thanks. I can't seem to find my hand raising thing. Seems to be in a
this
weird
works.
place, but
Yeah,
yeah. I teach an intro astronomy course for non-science majors. So
fun.
the thing Jessica described is obviously, well, it's a graduate level it looked like, and for very motivated students. So I have
Jessica's just, it is a majors course. It's a senior
yeah, yeah,
level
yeah.
course for majors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have students who are, terrified of the subject matter because they're not scientists and stuff like
Sure.
that. So I have them do an observing project, and there are actually 4 different things they can look at. Where the sun is rising and setting, um, phases of the moon. They can, if they're willing to go outside in the cold, they can photograph stars at the same time of night as as the Earth moves around the sun, the stars move, or planets, sequence. So I have a heterogeneous set of projects. So it's hard for me I put out a rubric, I have some check-in points, but I get a huge range in quality responses. I've been thinking about what I'm going to do about that. And so I thought 2 things I'm going to probably do this semester is, even though I give them a very clear rubric, a lot of students simply don't follow it. It's obvious that they like, I don't know, it's kind of like a cafeteria thing. They've chosen to do a couple things and just ignore the rest or something. So I'm going to show some anonymized things that were handed in previous semesters that had flaws, and I'll probably show a couple anonymized things that were handed in previous semesters that, because I have electronic submissions, that were exemplary, just to push everybody in the right direction. And I'm probably also going to force them to, they have to do these observations over several weeks. So I'm probably going to force them to bring in some preliminary results. And I'm not going to ask to see them myself. I do at a couple check-in points, but I'm going to ask them to show them to each other. because I think there's an element of peer pressure and embarrassment. I have a real problem with motivating the students to, do the work at all. So I think maybe that'll get them off their duff so they don't feel like they're slacking. Um, but anyway, I appreciate everything you guys are talking about. It's the scaffolding is very important. There's an enormity anxiety that students have. It's too big a project. They don't know how to start, and they end up procrastinating and stuff like that. So yeah, tough to motivate.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing. Um, I mean, I think, so I've taught non-science majors too. I mean, a lot of what math instructors teach are service courses, but yeah, I think they have this sort of such nervousness about exams that sometimes doing a project can seem like a gift, right? And you're giving them this gift, so then you can ask these things of them. But yeah, having it broken down into steps, and then uh, you know, it, it's essential. But Shenwei, I don't know if you saw this. Everyone could see the chat too. So Shenwei Van Harpen chimed in that sort of agreeing when we were talking, Brian, about showing them good examples. She's done that in the past, showing good examples of student projects can help them with the expectations. I think that and the rubric.
Yeah, and I've gotten a lot of feedback from course evals. I always ask my students, since this is a newer project that I've implemented in the capstone, to provide me feedback and what did they like about the class, what didn't they like. And I do often get asked, like, what is a project? What does a good project look like? So I do like to show examples, but part of it for me, and I don't know if anyone has any good ideas on this, is since there isn't one right answer for my particular project, I'm sometimes hesitant to show a good project and what a bad project is, because then students just sort of cling to that one and then they sort of try to make their answers look like that, which is really not what I'm going for. Yes, Brian.
I mean, I get what you're coming at with the answer, and I'm not trying to get my students to have an answers, but sometimes it's just something you addressed earlier. How would you want an employer to make something look? I
Yeah.
can at least, like, because sometimes they'll get things where the information's totally disorganized or, so some
Right. Is
students
this
take
your
some extra
best
time, and
output?
that's
That's
something
what
I can
you,
definitely like,
yeah.
you know, and you can pose that question to them. If I'm trying to review work you've done, who am I gonna, what's gonna be easier for me to grasp and what's gonna convey better? And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we've somehow managed to get to we're about 5 minutes left. So I don't know now if we've so we had sort of wanted to think about how to build a project and then also how to build checkpoints into a project. I feel like we've sort of touched on both of those a little bit, but we could sort of circle around again. And then about the tilt. And then I just wanted to make sure again to let you all know that feel free to reach out to us with more questions. But I saw other people turn their camera on was oh no, it's off again. But anybody else want to contribute to the discussion? Or
Sure.
thanks,
Hi,
Lindsay.
I'm Lindsay McHenry. I'm a professor in geosciences. And at the upper level, I actually have two OWCB classes in geosciences. Planetary geology is OWCB, and my X-ray analytical methods course is OWCB. And I feel like I have very comprehensive scaffolded assignments there, and I have no desire to really work on those. I feel like they're working really well. But what I'm more interested in is trying to figure out how to start moving that down in the curriculum a bit. I teach kind of an introductory majors level, like a 300 level course, Principles of Mineralogy. It's a much larger class. And it's also a class where there's very specific skills building class where they are gaining competencies in microscopy and certain kinds of analysis and doing things that they are going to need across the curriculum. So I'm having a hard time finding a space in a class like that to do something kind of scaffolded and building, and just
So
thinking.
what are the assignments right now? Like
Well,
lab
it's a lab,
reports,
yeah, it's a lab class.
it's a lab
So
class.
it has a 3-hour lab every week. So it's also just very time intensive already. And the idea of adding anything to the class is a little
Sure.
daunting to me.
Do you have are the students sort of, you said it's for majors, so is there, I don't know what the geosci majors are like. Is there any sort of variety where some of them are like, what kind of a spectrum is there in the class? Like, are there students that you think would do an extra credit project is so one thing I'm curious about.
I think there definitely are. And by majors class, I mean, it's not introductory. I mean, there's also a lot of conservation environmental science classes and material science people who take that class too, because it's useful for, across various different majors too. But yeah, it's mixed. There's probably some students who would, and there's probably some students who are already overwhelmed with the,
Sure.
yeah.
So I mean, that's one thing you could try. You could try designing something that would be extra credit, that would be a project. Is I think maybe we didn't even say like I've heard students talk about describing projects on job interviews, right? So it can be a valuable experience even if it's not part of the course grade. So if there would be some sort of extra credit project you could offer, and then students could get together and do it, and then maybe I don't know if you could squeeze any time in the course for them, those who did do the project, to give a bit of a presentation about it to the other students, or just to like you and another faculty member. There were when I was an undergrad, there was anyway, I had an experience where I had to do a sort of oral exam to my teacher and then two other faculty from the department that they just pulled in that I didn't know, and like I had to prepare for that, and that left an impression, I'll say. So they might especially if it's a class with a bunch of different students in it, and then maybe your core majors might be a bit more, they might want to get above and beyond where like the CES majors and some of the other majors go. Maybe something like that. And then maybe if you try an extra credit project, it's sort of like then you could experiment a bit, with building it up. And then after you have this experience with students doing it, you might see a way to build into the course more. I don't know.
Yeah, thanks. It's something to think about for me.
Anybody else? I don't know.
Oh,
Yeah.
Suzanne, this is Shanwei. So I heard what Lindsay was talking about. I teach math for elementary middle school teachers. I found, using a project like this does take more time of mine. So some semester, if I knew I was having a challenging semester in time management, I wouldn't go for this. But some semester I do try it. I noticed that I have my student build like geometry models with everything we learned, surface area, volume, and design, symmetry, all that. And when I did use a project and my students, surprisingly, they all did it. I mean, it counts for credit, right? And then they all seem to enjoy it. They're all different. And that semester just seems like they're more connected to this course. They're more willing to do work for other more like a traditional textbook problems. So I just want to say like it's time well spent for me and for my students. It does take time. But after a few semesters, when you're clear about the rubrics, when you are better at explaining things to your students, it does go more smoothly.
Well, I feel like we've only scratched the surface, but unfortunately our time is up. So hopefully this has been stimulating for you. And again, especially after we're back on campus again, feel free to reach out to Jessica and I. We can have a chat. We can go out for coffee once the union is back open again. I don't know, winterim, who knows what's going on, but and you know keep thinking about this, because I think it's you know uh, scaffolding upon scaffolding and scaffolding different aspects, like Jessica was saying. I think what the last couple points I just want to make is that I think it's really important for getting our students to be able to do things they didn't think they could do, right? And also to get them more engaged in the class. So thank you everybody for your time. Thank you very much for your participation and your attention. I think we're gonna now let you go on to the next thing. Bye.
Bye, thank you.